know you that on any Sunday afternoon here that we've had as good a time as we're going to have this afternoon. And it's largely because they are very serious writers. Also is because they know how to laugh, and they love to laugh. And I will assure you, they make me laugh. And I'll be shocked if they don't make you laugh. But it's not intentional on their part. It comes quite natural to them. Rick grew up in Possum Trot, Alabama. He's the author of 3 critically acclaimed and best-selling books all over but the shouting, Ava's Man and The Prince of Frogtown. He learned to tell stories by listening to masters, people from the foothills of Appalachia. He was a national correspondent for the New York Times and won the Pulitzer Prize for feature writing there. He's worked for other newspapers from New York to California, and it includes the South, with focus on the South, really. He's professor of writing in the journalism department at the University of Alabama. Roy Blount Jr., he knows the city well. He's a graduate of Vanderbilt. He's written 23 books, and I think we've been together 23 times on A Word on Words.
At least.
We've certainly been together.
Probably, yeah.
Something like 3 times, Rick. Every time I get a chance at them, I take it. And he's a contributing writer to the Oxford American, writes a regular column for Garden and Gun. Has done so in the past for Esquire, the New York Times, Atlanta Journal, among other newspapers. His work has taken him to Uganda, to China, to Iceland, and all across this country to 48 of the 50 states. The best thing about Roy, I think, is that, like Rick, he's in love with the art of writing. And he also is a pal of Elaine Wood, who sort of helps make this joint work whenever we come. So once more, Ted, with thanks to the library for helping us create this Writers Circle, and with thanks to my colleague Will Akers, who conducts these interviews, and with thanks to all of you for coming, I'd like to ask you, because I know it's coming later, but why not give Rick and Roy a round of applause? Thank you. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Roy.
I think that's wise to applaud before we start.
Thanks, Will. It's yours.
Okay. First thing I want to do is thank you all for coming again. And well, let's talk about the paragraphs. Everybody's got the pages on your chair. Rick, if you would read yours, please, and
Sure.
then we're going to talk about the writing in the paragraphs.
Sure. I remember first time we did this, John, I didn't need these. And a long time ago.
I didn't need the hearing aids I'm wearing either.
Well, you should turn yours off now and just pretend I'm Faulkner. This is the first paragraph of a book about my daddy. And I wanted to paint the picture of a stream that we played in as children, which is a sweet and, quite frankly, kind of sissy thing to write about. But my daddy threatened to drown us in that stream. So before I could show the point, I needed to paint a picture of the place, and this is what I tried to do. And water so fine, a few minutes of bad memory all but disappear downstream, washed away by 10,000 belly busters, 1,000,000 cannonballs. Paradise was never heaven high when I was a boy, but waist deep. an oasis of cut-off blue jeans and raggedy Converse sneakers, sweating bottles of knee-high grape and orange crush, and this stream. I remember the antidote of icy water against my blistered skin and the taste of mushy tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches unwrapped from twice-used aluminum foil. I saw my first water moccasin here and my first real girl. And being a child of the foot washers, I have sometimes wondered if this was my Eden and my serpent. If it was, I didn't hold out any longer than that first poor fool did. It took something as powerful as that, as girls, to tug me away from this tribe of sunburned little boys, to scatter us from this place of double dog dares, blow pops, cherry bombs, Indian burns, chicken fights, and giggling half-wit choruses of bald-headed man from China. Maybe we should have nailed up a sign, "No girls allowed," and lived out our lives here, to fight mean bulls from the safe side of a barbed wire fence with a cape cut from a red tank top, and duel to the death with swords sliced off a weeping willow tree. I don't know what kind of man I turned out to be, but I was good at being a boy. Then a thrust to the heart only bent against my chest, in a place where I could look straight into the Alabama sun through a water-smoothed nugget of glass and tell myself it was a shipwrecked emerald instead of just a piece from a broken bottle of Mountain Dew. The stream began in a jumble of rocks beside the Piedmont Highway, bubbling up cold and clear a half mile from my grandmother's house. The air always smelled of coconut-scented suntan lotion and lighter fluid. And in summer, the white gravel parking lot filled with church buses, poodle walkers, and weekend Hell's Angels who might have been born to run, but now lugged along well-fed wives in white go-go boots and polyester pantsuits rolled to the knee. I've been spending my whole life trying to get that last image out of my head. Thank y'all.
So first question then for Roy, what would you say about what you just heard as far as writing?
Well, it's real strong and it really grabs you. It really appeals to all kinds of senses, the sense of touch and the sense of smell. Well, I don't know, but literally, I almost smell it. I think it's.
Well, thank you.
I think that's good writing when you can smell it. But mushy tomato mayonnaise sandwiches and then visual thing, it's all real, physical. I like writing that's physical and grabs and gets right down into instead of, I don't see a single abstraction in here. It's really, that's what and it also rolls right along, obviously. Some people writing kind of hitches and stops, and you have to pick it up. I tell you, I love this custom of being able to read the text on the page while the author reads. If you can keep up, your mind doesn't wander nearly as much. If you've got something, I find that readings are hard to follow. But anyway, I think it's great to hear Rick read it, and and the great generality in it, I guess, is the theme sentence is, I don't know what kind of man I turned out to be, but I was good at being a boy. I think that gives you some suspense to find out more about becoming a man, but also putting you back there in the midst of that stream.
Rick, this was the beginning of the book. What was the hardest part to get the way you wanted?
Well, it's funny. That was actually the most fun I had in the book. I mean, remembering, when you're just putting in the colors has always been the fun part of it. Before you get to lives when they break or they twist, when you're just writing about the place you wade through, I think I don't want to sound highfalutin, but as a human being, and what Roy said about, first of all, you have made my life because what you said about abstracts.
Yeah.
I've been screaming against abstracts all my writing life. They don't say anything. They don't mean anything. They just take up space. They're like that popcorn filler that they put in packages.
And the terrible thing is that you have to learn them in order to make a living
Right,
these days.
exactly.
Give us an example of an abstract
Oh,
and how
like,
to
you
get
know,
rid
my
of it.
students, you know, not the good ones, but some of the ones that if you put a flashlight in their mouth and clicked it on, a beam would come out both ears and the back of their head. You know, they'll begin all their stories for me with on a typical day at the University of Alabama, comma, you know, you can see, or you might see, you know, and it just makes me angry because it's, well, you know, go look, or you know,
what
or
should
have
they-
somebody look for you, you know.
What should they have said?
What now?
What should they have said?
Well, they should have just gone out and looked at the damn tree, you know, you know, or had someone look at it for them, or you know, they should have you know, writing about this stream. All I really wanted to do was to give people a taste of what it was like to be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old in Calhoun County, Alabama, in a clear branch. You know, and you know, tomato sandwiches. You know, most folks in here, whether they admit it or not, know what I'm talking about. And you know, knee-high grape and orange. I picked those bottles because they have color. Like, you know, what Roy was saying. You know, I could have said 7-Up. I don't know what color 7-Up is. But a knee-high grape and orange jump out at you because they're purple and orange. And so those were on purpose, but most of it was just trying to let people live a little bit of what I lived then.
Did you know this was going to be the beginning, or did you find it?
No, I knew it was. I knew when I sat down to write. Where this goes is that my daddy was bad to get drunk, and he, you know, when he was one of them drunks that was always claiming to do worse or better than he was. He'd claim to do better, and of course he never would do better, and he would claim to do worse, and of course, thank God, he never did worse. And you know, he'd get mad and he'd say, you know, well, I'm just going to drown all of y'all in that stream. Well, we kind of mostly knew he wasn't going to do it. We were kind of banking on it, you know. But I wanted to show that was a lovely place, and it takes a certain kind of demon to ruin it. But if you don't. You know, Stephen King was a good writer not because he had the monster jump out of the closet and bite your head off. He was a good writer because you cared about the character he created before they lost their head. Mm-hmm. And this was just me trying to do that, I guess.
I think you succeeded.
Well,
How does bald-headed man from China go?
Well, it's very politically incorrect, and thank you for allowing me to do that. But it goes. The bald-headed man from China moves in with a family and won't go away. So my mama told me to give him some fish, and I didn't wanna. I gave him some fish, and he ate the dish. The bald-headed man from China. My mama told me to bury him deep, but I didn't wanna. I buried him deep and he stuck up his feet. The bald-headed man from China.
There you go.
It's Hank Williams.
Is it?
Okay, Roy, your turn, please.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. That was one of his gospel numbers.
Yeah, he's a Luke the Drifter.
That's right. It was Hank under the name of Luke the Drifter. Well, just an example of, I just read this thing over there I wrote about what if Bear Bryant ran education today. It taught education courses, talking about abstract language. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't, if Bear Bryant was teaching it, they wouldn't be saying, I wrote this back when Bear Bryant was alive, but they wouldn't be saying evaluative procedures for the implementation of program goals and objectives have been identified, formulated, and prioritized based on acceptable criteria in order to foster enhanced positive learning experientialization.
Now, Bear Bryant would have said, "Hey, Charlie, tell him to go out there and knock his dick string up to his watch pocket."
Exactly.
I might not ought to have said that either.
That's okay.
Did you want me to read my
I
thing?
do.
Okay.
Please.
This is from an essay I wrote that's in this book, Long Time Leaving. An essay I wrote for Oxford American called Why I'm Not an Outsider Artist. When it comes to ideal jobs, I'm going to cut out a couple of things. I'll tell you later why. When it comes to ideal jobs, I fall between two pedestals. Too little education to be a Supreme Court justice, too much to be a folk artist. I can almost see the visionary mural I'd paint. Quote, someday the Lord God Almighty will take notice of some of these things going on and say, what? And then look out. And don't look at me then, because I'm telling you now. The title too wordy? Not for this painting. Stark, big, brushy strokes, liberal in sentiment. For a change, make the forces of darkness jump. I'd toss Karl Rove in there, being rolled in crushed cornflakes, preparatory to baking. I never get going on it, though. One thing is, I can't paint. I just get it all over myself. It's like trying to work with saran wrap. I can never get the wrap around anything before it starts to self-adhere at various points. And soon, as if by magic, it is all wadded up unto itself. So, could I go with that? Create a whole new medium? No, it wouldn't be right. That biggest glob there is interesting, people would say. It's a reductio ad absurdum of the role of packaging in the world today, isn't it? Is there a decomposing body in there? And I'd have to say, oh no, I can't lie to you. I was just trying to wrap up a damn peach. This, I guess, is a theme sentence. It's hard to be an artist when you can't keep a secret. But my main shortcoming, here I go again, is that I'm not spiritual enough. We hear spirituality bandied about so loosely today. My journey from eBay addict to luggage consultant has been an almost spiritual experience. Almost. It's enough to make me think of spirituality as the feeling we get when something makes us really start to think, and then we stop. I may stop too, but I won't feel good about it. Call this excessive spiritual humility, spiritual prudery even, if you will. But when I feel revelations coming on, I tend to flinch and shake them off. No one would say of me, alas, what Peter Sheldall in the New Yorker has said of El Greco. His art affirms spirituality, the awareness that glimmers at the head spring of consciousness prior to thought and feeling as the primary fact of life, always on tap. I hear that. I keep trying to tell people up here in Massachusetts we ain't ever going to reclaim the nation's imagination, assuming we ever had it, as long as we keep thinking that thinking will make it so. Even intellectuals should have learned by now, postmodernism, that objective rationality is not the default position of the human mind, much less the bedrock of human affairs. In the South, this is the region's key cultural distinction, for good and ill. Nobody ever thought it was.
So you edited that.
Yeah, I took out there's a line there you see, be a Supreme Court justice. This is one thing, I wrote it during the Bush administration. Originally I said, not that this crowd would appoint me anyway, but this is a rare thing. Some editor at Oxford American stuck in this long dong silver joke, and I let it stay because I thought that's sort of funny. Maybe it needs a little something. But you know, Long Dong Silver was a porn star in a movie that, what's his name?
Don't look at me.
No.
I just said Deep Throat, and he said, don't look at me.
Yeah, right. No, Clarence Thomas, I couldn't think of that. When the Clarence Thomas was being considered for Supreme Court Justice, somebody accused him of having been a big fan of Long Dong Silver movies. But nobody remembers that, so I'm glad to have a chance to take it out, just because it's dated and it's weird that I let it stay in, except I thought, well, that's kind of funny. But the other thing I changed was that sentence, make the forces of darkness jump for a change, is how I wrote it. But I think it reads a lot better aloud. For a change, make the forces of darkness jump. I don't know. Anyway.
Why do you think it reads better the new way?
Because I don't know.
Because it does.
Yeah, just the rhythm of it, I think, is better. No.
Do you read when you're working on a draft? Do you read it out loud?
No, I don't. I probably should, but a lot of people do. But I sort of read it to myself in my head. I'd be embarrassed to read it. I don't know. The cat would look at me funny.
Rick, what about you?
Well, I think the thing, first off, you know, every time I listen to a writer, a good writer, read out loud, I always hit that one line that I think, if there wasn't like 200, 300 people watching, I'd write that down and use it later. And I don't want to beat the point to death, but just as a pure kind of beautiful line that make the forces of darkness jump. Well, I mean, you know, that's beautiful, but it is kind of the way we'd say it. I mean, it's the way we'd say it. If you'd asked a bunch of people working on a pulpwood road, you know, what do you do when you wrap that dead rattlesnake around that gear lever on that truck? Well, it made him jump. And I'm thinking about my people when I read that, and I know I'm reading a Southern writer, and it's just a pleasure to read as a tool. You know, it's just such a pretty thing to read. And I'll continue to talk about you like you ain't here.
Well, that's right.
But I think the thing that has always, you know, in this and everything that I've read of Royce has always been that, you know, he's writing what we think. He's just doing it so much better than we could think it. And, you know, his humor not once has a drum roll behind it. It's never, it's always light and I don't want to say delicate because I've read your fishing stuff, but it doesn't sneak up on you. It's just light, and it's not. He ain't prodding you with it, you know. And when you're done, you kind of shake your head and, well, yeah, that's it, or that's us. And I think it's those like this where you read it and you think, well, that's us. And I don't want to belabor the Southern writer point, because I know you say that about a lot of writers and they get mad at you. Because, you know, I mean, people fight you in our business if you hint that they're a Southern writer, because they think that somehow makes them bound up, you know. But if I didn't know who wrote this and I had never met Roy, I would know it was a Southerner.
And what tells you that?
Just the phrasing and the language and the mix of well, like that line that it's elegant, but it's not pretentious. And, you know, then there are phrases where he, you know, I mean, I'm sorry, but not too many people are going to be quoting painters, sculptors, et cetera, and you know, or literature greats. I had a friend once wrote a novel, and I read it out loud for radio, and he kept quoting Nietzsche in it. Well, hell, I didn't know how to pronounce Nietzsche. I barely know how to pronounce it now. And you know, you know you're reading something from a thinker, but he's not rubbing your nose in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of hard to pull off, you know. But I think Roy has always pulled that off, and you know, you wrote about flooding your basement, and I was reading it out loud to my students, saying, "Now listen to this elegant phrase." And one kid raised his hand and said, "He's writing about his basement flooding." I said, "Yeah, but it's flooding elegantly, isn't it?" So I'm going to stop kissing his. Well, never mind. We'll stop before it gets unseemly.
Was this hard? Did you have to massage the prose a lot, or did it come out close to this, or was it? Tell me how you got to where you are.
I don't remember exactly, but I always fiddle with things a lot and write. You know, in the old days when I used a big typewriter that made a lot better noise, I would have to type out a draft and then scribble all around over it and then type another draft. Now it's sort of like finger painting, you know, so it's kind of fluid, but I do a lot of shifting and moving and changing and backing and forthing, and so yeah, no, it doesn't just come flowing out. And one thing is that I think that I write like a combination of my parents. You know, my father always wanted to get the way in the car. Father always wanted to get there, you know, and my mother wanted to stop and look at stuff. And I tend to be more like my mother. Actually, I tend to want to, well, oh, wait a minute, let me slip this in, you know. And a lot of times, but I know you got to get there. So eventually you know, so I'm always trying to squeeze things in and bearing in mind that I got to go down here. And it makes for a kind of tension. I have dreams where I'm holding a lot of stuff, trying to run through a doorway with a lot of stuff in my arm, not being able to get through. And I feel like that when I'm writing something. I want to get all the, I want to see all the sides of it and not just be too simple about it. But on the other hand, I don't want to be so complicated that it doesn't ever get to a point.
I have that dream too, but I'm usually carrying a showgirl. But you know what? Like this, but like this line here, before it starts to self-adhere at various points, and soon, as if by magic, it is all wadded up unto itself.
There you go.
And it's that's what I'm talking about, that unto itself is part like Episcopalian minister and part like old English teacher, you know, and part just people who love the feel of a word in their mouth, you know, so I guess that's as good an example, I guess, as I can think of.
I think that you know, they talk about mouth feel in food, and I think that's an important thing to me in words. I mean, even if I don't read it out loud, it'll be running through my mind's tongue, something in the mind's ear, and that's, to me, that's the real sensual pleasure, is working, just sort of messing, like rolling, I don't know what to call it, but is actually messing. My father used to go down in the basement when he came home and just get away from the rest of us. He'd be down in the basement whistling to himself, a terrible whistler, but he'd be whistling and poking through all his little nuts and bolts. He had all these little drawers, you know, with all these little widgets in it, and you'd hear him with a long nail or something poking through it. And I like to poke through my words and mess with them, and the sensuous pleasure of words, and which is denied. I mean, I wrote a whole book, 2 books called Alphabet Juice and Alphabet Juice, about the connection between the sound and not only the sound, but the mouth experience of the words and their meaning, which is denied. It's a tenet of linguistics that the word itself and its meaning is, the connection is arbitrary, which I wrote 2 books trying to disprove that, because you know, words like we were just talking with Lee Smith and Bobby and Mason that we were reading, and we were talking about the word. We were going through the things we were going to read and realizing there were words in there we weren't sure how we pronounced them. We were all going, how do you pronounce it? And I came to Scourge, which I always sort of say scourge, but then I thought, well, no, scourge. It's actually kind of get that scour in there. We were saying, yeah, scour would be stronger. So I don't know. But anyway, it's the way it feels in your mouth. It's not just the sound of it. I mean, language is produced by the tongue, and if you don't bear that in mind, then you're going to have to write some sort of tasteless kind of prose.
When I read it in a book, they were asking Stephen King. They was at a writing conference, and some of the writers were off talking to each other, and one of them was Stephen King, and they said, what is it that they never ask you about at these things? And they said, the language.
Oh, yeah.
Would you agree, disagree?
You know, I think it is true that the more commercially successful auto writers are, the less people ask them about their language. The more the less they tend to look at the writing as a commodity, you know, and less as something really pretty, you know, that you, like Roy said, that rolls around in your mouth. And you know, when I started reading, I started reading the Boxcar Children and the Hardy Boys, and I don't know if that was great literature or not. I expect it. Some people would say it wasn't, but when I started, you know, when I read Salem's Lot, it was such a hopeless and sad book, just tragic, and it reminded me very much of those books that I'd been forced to read, and in English class about Southern writers, all hopeless, all sad, everybody's missing a body part. I mean, it's at least Stephen King had the decency to go ahead and chop them up and kill them off. But there are some sentences. If I had time, which is my hobgoblin, but if I had time, I could take a Stephen King and pull like 5 or 6 lines out, and people would, if I just read the lines out loud, they'd say, "My God, that's just beautiful. Where'd that come from?" And then you tell them, and they go, "Oh, it's that horror writer." I think that's kind of silly.
Well, Roy, what'd you read when you were little?
I read Hardy Boys, and I read one big thing I read, which goes to this point, is that my mother started out reading to me the Uncle Remus stories.
Yeah.
Which were, later on I realized when the little condescending white boy is talking to Uncle Remus, it's pretty embarrassing. But once you get into the story, it's great stuff, and the language and the way Joel Chandler, these are old African folk tales, but Joel Chandler Harris figured out ways to spell lots of it. And, like to be show, Toobysho, for to be sure. And bime by, Bimeby. I just love the fact that you could spell better than the dictionary sometimes. Get back to the way words are made by your mouth. And so I loved that. And then, I don't know, I read a lot about it.
Have you ever heard someone not from the South try to read Uncle Remus out loud? It's kind of horrifying.
Yeah.
They have a hard time with anything. I actually had a woman from Michigan at a big writing thing walk up to me and say, "Oh, I know you. You wrote that book all over but the shower."
Oh.
Oops. I hope she bought it at least.
Well, probably somebody with good taste gave it to her.
So you travel all over the country and talk about writing, and you like to talk about writing. What is it that you like to say?
Well, I think I think 2 things kill good writing. I think one is pretension. The other thing is that so many young writers seem to think that, and I can say this now because I'm not young, but they, young writers want to think that they can accomplish it without reading, which I find fascinating, because the kind of reading nerd, has been replaced, I think, in a lot of ways by the computer nerd, the gaming nerd, and all that, and I realize I'm a dinosaur and I'm behind the times. I know that, but that's one thing. But the other thing is just pretension, and this craft is funny. It's one of the few things on earth that people will defend to the death. They'll claim that it's the purvey of kind of an aristocracy, kind of an intellectual and even economic aristocracy, and it's not. There is no muse. I don't believe in, I would go to writing things and I would listen to very sweet ladies say to each other, "Did you write last night, darling?" "No, I didn't write last night because the muse wasn't on me." and
Couldn't carry her through the door.
Exactly. and they talk exactly, and they talk about writing like it's this thing. It's this like they only write at their Underwood, their 1919 Underwood, on their quote writing porch, unquote, by the weeping willow tree. Well, I've written on Upside Down Oil Drum, and I've written in every Hampton Inn in the continental United States. But more than that, the muse is not it's not a luxury. I've always written for wages and for deadlines and for contracts. And my muse is the contract. You write a book, your mama gets a house. You don't write a book, your mama don't get a house.
And she calls you.
Right, all in all, it's better to give your mama a house. But they treat writing like they write and they sit down to write, and in through the window floats this gossamer winged little thing. And it flits in and it flies around the room and it flings some kind of golden dust on them. And they go to town on that Underwood, and they're pounding the keys, and pounds of hard blood flies off their fingertips, and the paper starts to smoke, and they reach in, they snatch it out, and they fling it across the room, and then it's gone. They've only written a half a page. I call these, folks, the muses minions. The muses got them. Well, you can't do that. The muse is always with you. If you want to write, then, the muse is bumping up under the bed at night. It is always with you. And you're always afraid of it, and you hate it. And it's not a gossamer wing little thing that floats around. It's a hairy goat-like little thing. It's always clumping around. You're always thinking about it. I rarely have had a whole day that I didn't think, man, I need to get that down. And I guess that means I don't have a life. But anyway, I didn't mean to talk so long about that. But
Quick question, do you keep a journal?
I don't keep a journal because that would involve writing for free.
Same question, Roy.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I got to make a living. And also, whom am I writing to in that journal? I will write things down. I will make notes and jot them down and try to say them. But I can't imagine writing a diary, because either I'm writing it in hopes that someday someone will read this and realize what I was really like. And I don't want that.
No, it's too much effort to craft who we ain't.
Right. So, I write for money too. I agree. I've always written on deadline and overdue contracts and stuff like that. And the struggle is the problem is to get it done. Like my daddy is the contract, and my mother. I've got to keep my mother in the car, and enjoy it, and do the pleasure and the beauty of the thing, and do it for the sake of the thing, but also get paid. My daddy got paid. My mother tried to do it for the sake of the thing. Anyway.
What was the first time you got paid to write?
When I was 15, I wrote something for I had a wonderful English teacher, Ann Lewis, who died not too long ago, who told me how to be, just stuff I wrote in class, asked me to think about being a writer, at which time I had just about given up on being a three-sport immortal for a reason. So, and her mother edited a little magazine called Georgia Magazine, and I rewrote one of my papers for my class paper for her mother's magazine. She paid me $5, and then I started covering high school sports, my high school sports, for the Decatur DeKalb News, which is a weekly paper, and I don't know what they paid me, not very much, but that's how I started.
But they paid you?
They did pay me, yeah.
What was your first paycheck?
They paid me a lot quicker than people pay me
Today?
someday. I don't want to go into that. But.
I wrote a sports story for the Jacksonville, Alabama News. I was a late bloomer. I was 17 and a half, 18, and I wrote about a ball game, and I got the job because it was actually $50 a week. It was not a bad job. And I got it because the guy they'd offered it to first had a real good job at the Kentucky Fried Chicken and turned it down. And true story. Jerry Rutledge, he passed away not too long ago.
Still working at the Kentucky Fried Chicken?
I don't know what happened to Jerry, but I know he went on and built a successful newspaper career. But
no,
yeah, but no, I actually dated daughter of the guy who owned every Kentucky Fried Chicken in Northeast Alabama. If I'd had any sense, I'd have stayed with her.
Yeah. You'd eaten for free.
Yeah.
So, did you have, so I'm repeating the same question, but did you have a teacher who helped you? Or did you have a teacher who squished you?
No, not squishing at all. I had many teachers who, not many, but a handful of teachers who, the most important was, in some ways, was Speedy Orville Johnson. Orville was the basketball coach, and he noticed that I liked to read. We called him Speedy because he had real short legs. And when he would run down the basketball court, officiating the practice, he looked like a road runner. His little legs would just be going like that. But he just noticed one day, he said, "I noticed you like to read." And he walked me into the library and he started pointing at the You Were There books and all these books he thought I might want to read. And our library was the size of this little alcove we're in here. And I'll always appreciate that. But I had a few English teachers in high school that were very kind to me. I had a composition teacher who told me that I was not mature enough to take English composition. And then I had another one who tried to fail me because I didn't come to 3 years of homeroom. So I know, but I had a lot of them who sometimes it was just someone hands you a book, hands you a paperback.
He said, "Read this."
Yeah, it said, yeah.
I was in the eighth grade, and I was reading Catcher in the Rye. And when I don't know this doesn't happen to me now, but I could drill down so deep in the book that the world could be exploding, and I'd never know, and you could walk and read. And so I was deep into Catcher in the Rye, and my homeroom teacher yanked it out of my hands, and which was not a good thing to do. And he said, "Does your father know you're reading this book?" And then it was really one of the most satisfying moments of my entire life. I reached up and I grabbed it from him. He was really tall, and I said, "My father suggested I read this book." He didn't give me too much trouble after that.
Yeah, I can remember long before I wanted to be a writer. But I remember being a kid and suddenly writing something for school, lying on the floor, and I just thinking, and I would forget everything. I can't do that anymore. It's hard for me to focus. If I could focus the way I focused when I was
It's unbelievable how children
8 or
can.
something. Yeah, I can still remember just everything else disappearing, and I didn't think I could do that for a living, but it sure did. It stayed with me.
When did you know you were pretty good at it?
I don't know. I'm trying to remember this. Somebody asked Willie Mays when he knew, I can't remember, when he knew he was a good ball player. He said, "Every time I saw a ball go up in the air, I knew I could get it." Well, I don't know. Well, teacher, that same teacher told me, that I could write, and it appealed to me suddenly, and that's when. And then I started writing for the school paper and making fun of people more popular than I was, and I got more popular.
A good
myself.
reason.
Yeah. It got good to me at that point.
Rick, you teach writing, and one of the things that I have trouble with my students is getting them to rewrite. How do you do on that score?
Well, see, if I had them rewrite, then I'd have to grade the papers twice.
I knew you were smarter than me.
There's not a lot of rewriting going on there. What I do is I have them bring their papers in to my office, and I'm very lucky I have the luxury to do this. Now, sometimes I'm doing it on my way out the door, running to an airport, but they'll read me their lead, and they'll read me their first, say if it's a 10-page feature magazine piece, I'll have them read me aloud their lead and their first page or two. And usually if that lead and that first page are smooth and interesting and are not in the abstract or not painful to the human ear, then they're going to be all right on the other 8 pages. They're going to be fine. And that's how we head off the disasters. And but I never was. I don't really rewrite. What I do is and it ain't that it's good the first time, but I read every line and rewrite every line and every phrase as I go. And I rewrite that first phrase. And that first paragraph, that lead, or that first paragraph of a chapter may take me 2 days. But I rewrite as I go, so that when I hit the last period of the last sentence of the last page of whatever I'm working on, I'm through. But I might have rewritten that son of a gun, 30 times in the process, but I don't get a draft and then go back and redo the draft. And I think it's just painting the barn white and calling it a house. I think it's rewriting. It's just a different kind, of rewriting. It looks like I'm not, but I am.
Roy, what do you do?
I rewrite a lot, and I tend to go in sort of surges, and get it down and look at it and say, "Oh God." Really, it's bad, nobody can read that. So then I'll go fool with it and mess with it and stuff, and I fool and mess with things. I could never tweet. Can't imagine tweeting, because I would always say, "Wait a minute, no, I don't want to send it yet. Wait a minute. I just buried my lead. Wait a minute." So I'm just very worry a lot about it and keep on beating on it till it starts. Once it starts going, it gets better. To me, the hard part about a long thing, you can get the beginning, you walk around and finally figure out a lead, but then there's this, it's like the second gear is hard to do, and you can begin to see the end of the road down there. You may not get the same ending you think you're going to get to, but it's somehow getting from the beginning to the end, the middle part is what's hard. And it can get too big and you lose your way, and that's in the middle of the night, you're sitting there and getting over that hump is the hard part.
Who do you tell people to read lately? When people say, "What have you read that was good?" or what do you tell your students they better read, or what do you tell people? Read this.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I always tell people to read Charles Portis. He's just because, people say, "Who's your favorite writer?" And I say Charles Portis, just because it's a silly question. But I love Charles Portis, and not enough people know about him. He wrote True Grit, but he also wrote 4 other novels, I guess, that are just wonderful. And I think he's the funniest American writer because his characters are so unfunny. They have no sense of humor at all. And he's the most straight-faced writer I know. And there's something just pure and beautiful about how unpretentiously funny he is. They're all from Arkansas. He's from Arkansas, still in Arkansas, and but it's just effortless and it's just perfect. And then Flannery O'Connor, I love Flannery O'Connor. She's also just effortlessly funny. I wrote a whole book, a biography of Robert E. Lee. They asked me to write a series of short novels, short biographies, Penguin Lives, and they wanted me to do Mark Twain, which was an honor to be asked, but I had just written a bunch of things about Mark Twain, and I don't know, couldn't think of anything to say. And they said, "Well, how about some other Southern icon?" And I said, "How about Robert E. Lee?" And so the next thing I knew, I'd spent longer than the war writing that. But the thing that kept me going was to be able to use as an epigraph of the book a quote from "A Good Man Is Hard to Find," which even the title has to do, reflects on Robert E. Lee. But the quote was, "Shut up, Bobby Lee, it's no real pleasure in life." Which is what the Misfits said. They just murdered a whole bunch of people, and Bobby Lee, the Misfits henchman, says, "Some fun, huh?" And he says, "Shut up." They just murdered this whole family. And the Misfit says, "Shut up, Bobby Lee, it's no real pleasure in life," which was a big thing in Robert E. Lee. He had a great capacity for pleasure, but he just kept denying. He was a big self-denier, and that is a real poignancy of who Robert E. Lee was, I think, that he, because his father had shamed the family so much, and because he was so religious, he loved dancing and gossiping with belles about their beaux, but he kept insisting on denying himself pleasure and thinking about how cruel everything was and wishing he was dead. That's another thing. That's one thing he had in common with Mark Twain, is they were both often wishing for death. But Mark Twain came from a little different angle. But at any rate, so I mean, I just love the joke of getting that line in there and applying it to Robert E. Lee. And it took a long time to write that.
Who do you recommend?
Well, it's funny that you would mention Portis because, Portis always wrote like in his description of things, what I imagined an old poster would look like tacked to a wall. It was just vivid and worn at the same time. But when Larry McMurtry wrote Lonesome Dove and he was describing Jake Spoon riding up to Lonesome Dove after he had shot a dentist. And Gus or Woodrow Call, one of them says to him, why are you fleeing Arkansas? And he says, well, I killed the dentist. And well, how'd you kill him? Well, I was shooting this other fella, but the .40 caliber slug went through the wall of the saloon and killed the dentist walking outside. One of them says, well, they shouldn't put you and hang you for that, for killing the dentist by accident. And there's just something beautifully absurd about it. That is exactly the way people talk. It is exactly the way people talk. And so there are things in that book that I have carried with me throughout my life. I almost said writing life, but that sounded really pretentious. But I have carried that book around with me. When Dickens was writing about the two street urchins in Christmas Carol, which he wrote for money. He wrote for money. There was no nobility behind that. But even in that book, there was social justice in it. He says that their names are want and ignorance, and you can pay for them now, or you can pay for them later. And I just think that's just brilliant, that you can use a simple image to make people feel something. I've always thought was just remarkably beautiful. And Eudora Welty writing about the killing of Medgar Evers. I know she wasn't. That's not a stated thing, but the murder of Medgar Evers, and she has Byron D. LeBeckwith in The Honeysuckle, and he looks at Evers through the sights of his rifle and says, "I knowed I had the right one. I knowed it by his still listening back." And so. I think I could sit here all day and go writer by writer that has given me a building block or some mortar to stand on. Not that I'm very high, because I might be going in the other direction. But that's all right. I'll yell from the bottom of a well. That's all right. I read James Lee Burke. And a friend of mine, not a friend, but a guy I knew at one of the newspapers I worked for, said, well, I don't know how you can read that guy. He writes the same book over and over again. And I said, well, yeah, but he writes it really well over and over again. And they said, well, he even writes about the same sunset over and over again. I said, well, at least he's consistent. And so, Carl Hyacin writing about South Florida is just blackly funny, darkly humorous. And he stuffed a tourist in a piece of Samsonite luggage and stuffed a rubber alligator down his throat. If that ain't brilliant, I don't know what is. So, I do like Southern writers mostly because I think there's something in them. That's just, and I can include Texas in that because I have to. But I think there's just something richer. The same reason that biscuits and gravy is better than a bagel.
I'd go with that. This is a room full of writers, and some are beginners and some are not. How did you, Roy, figure out what you were good at? Did it take a while?
By trying to do it. I just always took the closest opportunity to what I wanted to do. And I had the advantage of getting jobs and assignments, and so that I was able to go out and have to try things that maybe I wouldn't have tried otherwise, and I had to get them done, and so I think that's. I mean, you know, and I don't know. I mean, I had to do it. So, but I found a way to do different things. I don't know. I just always figured I could. I wrote my way through college. You know what I mean? Teachers are so pleased to get a paper that they can actually read. I tell you.
Funny how that works.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, and I've written my way through all kinds. I don't know. I mean, some things seem like more likely projects than others, but I've always tried, like writing about Robert E. Lee. I always tried to do something a little to push myself and surprise myself and try something I didn't quite think I could do. And I wish I'd done more than that. I wish more of that. I wish I'd pushed myself off into the unknown a little more. But it's always, I don't know. Wish I'd written. I don't feel like I've written the book I should have written. You know, I should have written a novel. I should have created characters. I mean, I've done a lot of things, but and maybe I tried to do it. And I wrote one novel. I don't know, but it's always I can always feel like I'm not good at anything at the drop of a hat. So it's always a mystery to me.
Michael Crichton I read every book he ever wrote, every translation of it on the big wall in his office, because he felt like he didn't know how to write, but he'd point at those and say, I did that so I can keep doing it.
He must know how.
I lost my question for Rick. I know. Changing the subject a little bit, is you've interviewed lots and lots of people. What would you say is a good way to think about going into an interview?
Well, I think the main thing, I think, is to not ask them the questions they've been asked 1,000 times, because those are out there. Those answers are out there. And those are easily rehashed just by saying, so did you say this? Or, you know, is this? But I try to ask questions that are probably a little bit off the wall, but they make perfect sense. I interviewed a suspected serial killer named Orlando Bosch, who was a alleged terrorist. He was down in Miami. He was an anti-Castro revolutionary, and he was revolutionary against the revolution, and he bombed allegedly a plane flying from, if I've got my history right, it's been a long time, but flying from Cuba, I think, to Jamaica and then to Angola. And they were transporting military advisors from Cuba to Angola. Not Angola, Louisiana, the other one. And Bosch allegedly planted a bomb on the plane, blew the plane out of the sky, and killed those advisors. He also killed, you know, women, children, allegedly. All allegedly. And so I went and interviewed him. And, you know, he wanted to talk in Spanish because Spanish is more perfect for talking about revolutions. And my Spanish, I speak just enough Spanish to get me in trouble. I know how to say, Señorita, que linda eres tú. And I know how to say, don't shoot me, in 3 or 4 languages. But and he wanted me to drink rum with him. And I don't drink very much. So I was completely lit halfway through the interview, and he'd run off the photographer that was interpreting, so I'm not real sure what he was saying. But I did ask him one question. I said, what do you dream about? And he said, I dream about bodies in the water. And I think that's as close to a confession as we're ever going to get. And so I always ask people what they dream about. I ask them what the best day of their life is. What's the worst day of your life? Questions that maybe would be better suited for some guy with a really fine ponytail to ask, you know, or I don't know. maybe Hollywood would ask those kind of questions, you know. But a reporter from the Birmingham, Alabama News came to interview my mama after All Over But the Shouting came out. And she said, what have you been doing, Miss Bragg? And she said, well, I've been up here on this pedestal walking around. My son put me on, trying not to fall off. And anyway, the reporter asked her, what was the best day of your life? I've never asked that question of anyone. And I got all puffed up because I thought Mama was going to say, well, you know, it's
my son's book.
Yeah, it was the day my boy wrote that book about me, or the day my boy won, you know, that prize, or this. I never came up. She said it was the day my first son was born. And the reporter, being a good reporter, asked her, why? You know, why was it a good day? And my mama just began to talk. She talked, you know, without thought, just honest, said, well, you know, I never had a doll. Because she'd grown up during the Great Depression. And what she meant was she'd never had a store-bought doll. They had made dolls out of everything. She never had a store-bought doll. I never had a doll. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking at this thing. And my brother was, you'd have to know him. He's my little brother Mark said that he's never been a child. That when he was born, he just dusted himself off in the hospital and walked home. But it's true. But my mama said, I was looking at this little thing, this perfect thing, and I just talked to him all night long. And my daddy said the next morning, Margaret, you kept me up all night long talking to that boy. And the reporter, being a good reporter, said, what did you say? It's not the question and answer, it's keeping after it and running it into the corner where you can kill it or catch it. And that's the secret. And what did you say? And my mama said, well, I just kept saying over and over again, you're mine. You're mine. How can you not write a good story about that? You know, so I think, you know, asking questions that are not predictable, not allowing the interview subject to necessarily drag you along, but, you know, and I hope Roy will at least nod, but, you know, it's kind of a manipulation, you know, it is. You're trying to get something from people. And we want it to be a noble thing. We want the interview to be a noble, you know, warm, honest exchange. But sometimes you're just manipulating people into telling you stuff. And I know that sounds terrible. And we would never say it at a journalism conference. But you're doing this. And once you've set the hook, then you can get some things. And that reporter very gently got more out of my mama than anybody ever has, including me. It's pretty good.
Yeah, Graham Greene writes in a memoir about having been in the hospital somehow. For some reason, he was in the ward with other people, and he tells this pathetic scene of a child dying or something, just some horrible, pathetic thing with the family all around, and how painful it all was. But he said, but there was a sliver of ice in my heart that I was, taking notes and detached enough from the pathos of the whole thing to be getting something out of it. And I think that writers, maybe everybody does, I don't know, but writers need to have a kind of, who Janet Malcolm said, writers are always selling everybody out, which I resent that statement. I don't think it's quite true. But you do have, I've asked people about dreams too. I asked a pole vaulter once what he dreamed about, and he says, I dream that my pole is a rope. Obvious. Maybe Freudian, I don't know, but I never lost track of it. But I think that interviewing people one thing, I mean, when you go on, I never had been interviewed for a long time when I was interviewing other people, but then when you're on a book tour, people interview you, you realize how badly it can be done, you know. Well, the worst, you shouldn't ask people questions that makes them do all the work. You know, the worst extreme example was that once I was going to go make a talk somewhere, and I had to call the school paper to be interviewed, and I said, I hear I'm supposed to call and be interviewed because I'm making a speech next week, and they finally sent somebody to the phone, and he said, "What have you done?" But on the other hand, you don't want to ask a question that sort of just determines the answer to begin with. So it's a conversation. You want to try to get a feel for people, and some people are too wary to do it. I've found that people in sports, anyway, I did a lot of sports writing, that for a long time they won't tell you anything, and then all of a sudden they'll just tell you everything, and they'll tell you more than you wish you had heard, you know. And but you have to you do have to get into people's confidence, and then you have to try not to sell them out. Try not to take advantage of them, and certainly try not to change what they said or change the sense of it. But anybody's always surprised by an interview, I think, when they see it come out because they didn't realize they said that. Then you have to go back and talk to them a lot of times, and but by and large, I've had people be very unhappy about stuff I wrote about them, but by and large, I think you can treat people decently whom you have interviewed. But yeah, you are trying to get something out of them. That's your job. You're not a therapist. You're trying to get copy.
There was an article in the paper years ago, the guy who later did the TV show Lost, he had to interview, he was beginning as a writer, and he had to interview Harrison Ford. And he thought, I'm never going to come up with a question that he hadn't already been asked. So he literally, and I think this is great, he literally dialed telephone numbers at random, one and an area code and a number, said, "Hi, I've got to interview Harrison Ford, what would you like to know?" Whoever answered the phone. And then he wrote down the questions that those people asked, and that's what his interview was. It was a great interview because the questions were insane.
You know what would have been funny if it had been Harrison Ford.
Well, the time, the time to be kind, I think, and don't get me wrong, because the interviewing process is a manipulation, doesn't mean you get to manipulate, their meaning, and but the time I think to be kind is your writing, and I have always tried not to hurt anybody because I've never been an investigative guy. I mean, I've written about some pretty harsh things, but I've never been an investigator who was out to get someone, and never have. But you try to be kind after, after the fact, and if I'm going to make a mistake, and I make plenty of mistakes, but I'm going to try to be kind to a fault, probably, which I guess makes me a big old marshmallow.
I won't tell.
Thank you. I have an image.
Talk about tone and how you get on it and how you stay on it and get it right in what you're writing.
Me?
Either anybody.
Ooh, I don't know. It's in the sound of the words, and you're not just saying some abstract thing. Tone of voice is, you know how to do tone of voice when you're talking to, if you're talking to a dog, you talk different from the way you're talking to a cat. I don't know. You talk, it's all when you're talking. Oops, excuse me. When you're talking, it's in your mouth and and that's an interesting thing. Is the different once you can think that you got the right tone, then you have to have the capacity after you write something down to look at it and realize that it's not right, that it sounded right to you inside. But once you got it down, you realize that somebody else will read that and it won't sound right. So then you have to fix it. That's, I think, a writer has to be a reader in that sense, has to have some objectivity toward what they wrote down. But it's all just the sound, to me, the sound of words and the choice of words, meaning words. I don't know. But a lot of it is, I think, reconciling, trying to find an appropriately sounding set of words to fit the tone, to fit the occasion, to fit the sentiment, whatever you're doing. I don't know, it's hard. I don't know how to. But you obviously, some people can. You can start. Rather than tell somebody how to do something like that, I just tell them to read a whole lot of good writers and get a sense of how they do it. And there's no formula for it, but if you read enough and also talk to enough people, it helps you develop your. Somebody once asked me at reading, how did you develop your own voice on the page? And I really never had thought about it. And then I went back and I realized that a lot of it was trying to sound like other people and failing, and then you begin when you fall short of sounding. I started out reading Robert Benchley a lot. I had this high school teacher gave me a lot of New Yorker writers, New Yorker humorists to read, Thurber and Benchley, and I thought I could do that, but when I tried it, I came out differently, and then you begin to hear yourself. But a lot of the writing, I can think that tone comes in part from people you talk to. I hear my father's voice and my mother's voice, and I always push my mother's voice past the pathetic into the comic. Is one thing I realized I was doing very late in life. But I don't know. So it's just a knack you develop from trying to do it and doing it wrong. Trial and error.
I think it's, and I tell my students this, is that it's everything you hear. If you're reading any good writer, and you may not hear a bell go off in your head, you may not see things, your focus might not get sharper, but if you just recognize that that's pretty, music, listening to Jimmy Rogers. My grandfather had a whole trunk full of Jimmy Rogers records, and listening to Hank Williams, listening to sometimes not necessarily words, but just cadence and rhythm. Listening to Sam Cooke. Listening to Wanda Jackson. Growl into the microphone and seeing the whole picture, seeing that beaded miniskirt and those high heels and that cowboy hat, and hearing that, that voice of a goddess, that body of a goddess, and then that voice, which can only be described as some demented leprechaun, growling in the microphone. I think your voice, it may be yours alone. It may be something, heaven sent, but it's. I just think everything piles up in you. And this is not smart sounding, I know, but it just piles up in you, and I don't know what mine is, but I know it, my grandfather, I never met my grandfather on my mama's side, but I've heard his stories all my life. My uncles, when they tell a story, are rich and vivid. My uncle, Wild Bill Bundrum, found working at the steel mill to be boring. Working next to a vat of 500 gallons of molten steel he found to be boring. So he possessed cars on the weekends, repossessed cars. I guess possessing a car would mean you demonized it, but anyway. But he would repossess cars, and he was telling me the story. I asked him, I said, what's the most interesting car you ever repossessed? And he said, well, it's summer, August, and I was in the yard, and he often had that effect on people.
That's all right.
But he said, I was in the yard, and I made sure there wasn't a pit bull or a shotgun involved, and I jumped in, and I hot wired it, and off we went. And I said, I heard a hissing sound from the back seat. And I thought, well, was it a snake? And he said, no, but I thought it was. And he said, I finally got stopped, and I looked in the back seat, and there's a baby bag. So I undid the zipper and looked, and there was a baby bottle in there, and about half full. Well, it'd been in there 3 days. And the hissing sound, he determined when he picked up the baby bottle and looked at it closely, was coming from the bottle. And he made that determination right before the nipple shot off and hit him in the eye. And he was blind for quite some time in that eye, being the only man that I know of to have his eye put out by a nipple. And now, when my mama tells you a story, it is beautiful. It is eloquent and sweet. She uses language like, if you ask her, did you tell the truth? She would not say, yes, I told the truth. She would say, hun, I'm telling God's sanction. Because she is a product from the foothills of the Appalachians and those people. So if I can land somewhere in the middle between her language and my uncle's grit and humor, there's a lot of blood involved too, because they're fighting people. But if I can just land somewhere in the middle, and it's not something I think about, it's just something that I know I'm trapped in. I know I'm not ever going to be, I don't ever want to be any smart. I know this sounds terrible, but I don't want to write smarter. I don't want to write clearer. I'm happy being stuck in the middle of those people, but I truly can't say I've ever thought, I wonder how my voice is evolving. I never have thought about it. I'm just happy being what I got, the pieces that I have.
Well, I hope tomorrow when you sit down to work, you won't ask yourself that question.
No, but I will now. I'm completely screwed for the rest of my life. Yeah, I hope this teaching thing works out because my book life is over.
Roy, when you rewrite, what kind of questions do you ask yourself? Do you ask yourself consciously stuff when you look at the writing, or do you just mess with it?
Well, I'm always trying to make it flow. It's sort of like it's a little bit like sanding, after you whack things together and you rub your hand. This is the last stage of rewriting, but you rub your hand over it, and if you get a splinter, you got to sand it some more. I want to feel like it reads smoothly. You can almost just not. You can't help yourself from reading it. If it came in front of you, it would just you wouldn't have to make an effort to read it. But that's so I want to make it as smooth as I can, but also as pointed as I can. And also, I tend to write sentences too long. I don't break them, but I tend to. I think over the years I've gotten shorter and briefer and more to the point. I hope, because I look back at some of the things I allowed myself to write. With all these clauses coming in and out, and I just thought, well, I can write it. Somebody ought to be able to read it. It's grammatical, by God.
I understand it.
Roy will pose a question and then answer it. And he answers it better than the reader can think about it. And I'm not saying anything bad about us readers, because we're very intelligent. But he can, he'll pose a question, he'll answer his own question, and you think, well, yeah, I guess I'll keep going. I guess I'll keep reading because that made sense, and it's fun, but more than anything, it just the rhythm and the pacing and the cadence and everything just seems so natural. Now I'm glad to hear you work so hard at it. I feel a lot better.
So I wonder about what's going to happen to writers. We're talking about music. I think that songs that have meter in them and actually rhyme and have verses. Songs today. I wrote a little thing. Somebody put out a book about the Beatles and said, "Would you write something about the Beatles?" And I said, "Okay, I will write about my favorite line in a Beatles song, which is Vera, Chuck, and Dave," which is from When I'm 64. Because it's just, you try to get better names than that, and apparently they made them up at nobody knows who came up with Vera, Chuck, and Dave. Paul McCartney wrote the main song, but then they came to, I don't know. I like to think that John came up with Vera and Ringo came up with Dave. But that whole, and I compared that song, When I'm 64, to a song that's one of the big songs in the Baz, whatever his name, the latest
Lerman.
Great Gatsby. There's a song called Will You Still Love Me When I'm No Longer Beautiful? Which to begin with is just, I mean, that song, you know, it assumes that you're beautiful. And but it has this, When I'm 64, has this beautiful structure to it. It's just, it's not poetry, but it's just beautiful light verse, you know, and indicate precisely what you mean to say. You can't, there's only one way to say that, indicate precisely what you mean to say. But songs today, that song, Will You Still Love Me When I'm Beautiful, for one thing, it gives the whole, it's so much funnier to say, will you still need me, will you still feed me, when I'm 64. That's funnier, and it's more human, and it's less vain, but also that song has no structure to it. There's no meter to it. It's like things like, well, you know, will you still love me when I'm still beautiful? And there's no meter to it. And I find that people writing verse now often see they don't know how to do meter. They don't know how to make it, you know, they can say it in their heads, they can sing it in their heads, but when you write it down, it doesn't move like that. You have to force it to move. And I think that's a great exercise for a writer, is to try to write light verse, write verse that's metrical and that has form to it, you know, for, you know, stanzas and all that stuff. Now, so much popular music now, I mean, rap, hip hop does have a kind of structure to it like that. But so many songs today, like that one from The Great Gatsby, is just this big gob of opulent sound and instruments that just is, but if you break down the words, it's just like some conceited person, you know, talking not very well.
I'll just sit here and be quiet.
But you know, we're talking about Hank Williams and all the country songs. They have structure to it. You can recite the, you know, think of anything else. And Jimmy Rogers, all those guys wrote and gals wrote things that look okay on the page. You don't have to have the music with them for them to be catchy.
You could read them as story.
Yeah.
You know, Jimmy Rogers, and I'll screw up the title, but you know, about being, you know, walking up to a railroad bull and saying, you know, I'd like to ride that train home. And then when he tells the railroad bull he doesn't have any money, the railroad bull throws him off. And there, you know, there's a hopelessness in that. But it's a whole story, you know. And sometimes it can be just two lines. Al Jolson, you know, and Bye Bye Blackbird, you know, it's only, I guess you'd call it haiku if you're going to try to compare it to poetry, but it's pretty and it looks pretty sitting there on the page, and I think, you know, very selfishly, when I write anything of any length, whether it's going to be like 5 or 6 pages or 300 pages, I want there to be a pretty line in it. I want there to be not just one, I hope, if it's 300, but I want there to be a pretty line in that first paragraph, and I want there to be a pretty line throughout. And I will waste selfish time trying to come up with a pretty line. And I know that's not valuable maybe, but you know, if you can't be a little selfish in this process, then why? Good Lord, they can't pay you enough money to make it. I mean, I always say that writing is easy. And people look at me like, well, you've lost your damn mind. But writing is easy compared to roofing. You know? Anybody that's ever carried a concrete block for any distance, or carried 2 at any distance, and not peeled all the skin off their legs through their blue jeans, you know, that's hard. Anybody that's ever worked on a rubber mat, anybody that's ever, you know, wiped the tables at the Waffle House, anybody that's ever done those things would laugh out loud if a writer said, God, this is hard.
Let's say you said they get to do it, and you get to do it in the shade.
I was going to say,
Yeah, they'd laugh out loud at us, but it is hard compared to, you know, I guess, I don't know, sleeping. But it is, you do have to think hard. And I think it's hard enough to where if you can't be selfish in it, here and there, I never will forget, I'd written a story about a Mardi Gras parade. And it was about race and exclusion. And I saw a young black woman looking up at the float, and one of the guys on the float peeled back his mask, and it was a young black man. And she smiled. And I thought, being a cold-hearted sliver of ice in the heart writer, said, there's my lead, you know. But I wanted to do more than that. I wanted some color. I wanted to write a little bit. So I kept watching, and the beads would fly down out of the sky. It was dark, through the beams from the street lights. And do y'all know the beads I'm talking about that look liquid? You know, they're plastic, clear plastic, but and they're purple, green, yellow, gold, whatever. And the light would go through those as they would come down. So I'm sitting there, and being a writer and all, and being very intelligent, said, well, that looks like something. What does that look like? And I thought of all the times me and my brothers had taken Kool-Aid and threw it at each other. Sometimes outside and sometimes not. And the beads of that Kool-Aid, that liquid, that's what it reminds. So I wrote in my lead, the beads fell through the glow of the streetlights like Kool-Aid rain. And then I hit period, and then I got up, because sometimes you just write something so pretty you got to walk it off. Oh, don't tell me you hadn't done it. But sometimes you just, man, it's like you rubbed something too long. You just got to get up and I got to stop this, and 'cause you just can't keep rubbing that spot, because you just can't. So you got to get up and walk it off, and sometimes you got to walk all the way around the building for you, So anyway, I wrote that line, and I came back and wrote the rest of it and turned it in. And later that day, I was in a crowd. This was before cell phones. I was in a crowd of people, a million drunk people at Mardi Gras, on a payphone, talking to the copy desk at the New York Times. And the editor said, Rick, we're looking at this. We really like this, but I think we need to shorten it a little bit. And I said, well, do you have a place to cut? And he said, yeah, we're thinking about that first line.
There you go.
Oops.
I've been listening to every word you said, but while I was listening, I was thinking, I kept trying to think of recent things that have been running through my mind because they're so rhythmically nice, and that just sort of say themselves. One of them I heard on the radio, somebody singing a song that had the phrase in it, hear the rhythm of a tambourine. Mm-hmm. Hear the rhythm of a tambourine. There's something about, and that's just a simple thing, but it just flows right through your mouth, or at least my mouth, enjoys saying it. Another thing is the longer thing from the song Secondhand Rose. Even Jake the plumber, who's the man I adore, had the nerve to tell me he's been married before. Really funny for one thing. He had the nerve to tell me, but there's only one way to say that. It's metrical. It flows, and it's just perfect. And when I'm rewriting, I aspire to that. Just seldom. I don't like a dead beat in between. Too many dead beats. Okay, so that's
dead beat will kill you. I mean, it really will. I mean, it'll take all the joy out, and it won't. It's funny how we assume it kills it for everybody. And I don't think I've got any great fine-tuned antenna, but it'll ruin it. I mean, in Ava's band, there's a every beginning of every chapter had a scene. I painted a picture for folks, and there was one chapter where I just apparently had some kind of brain embolism or something, because I didn't do it, and it stands out to me. You know,
In
like
print?
like a dead key on a piano, and I'll hate that the rest of my life. And I know it seems like a little thing and a silly thing, but it's really not. And it makes me just spitting mad.
So let's talk about something else.
All right.
Who's got a question?
Well, this was easy.
Yeah, let's go home.
This is like being at Methodist church.
How?
Well, you know, the Methodists don't get all overwrought and like immediately fling themselves on the floor and start rolling around. You know, if we were in a Pentecostal church, there'd be people on the floor right now. Or at the very least, waving a hand up in the air to ask y'all don't be afraid of Roy. He's nice.
Y'all drove all this way and parked. You can ask me a question.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, but you can.
What's your favorite line from this interview so far? and leave me out of it. I don't want you to.
I can't. I'm always
never
concentrating on the next question I have to ask.
No. You didn't hear anything we said.
I have a question.
Back.
Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask about that balance between writing for the paycheck and listening to the music. I mean, that music being inside you. And how do you balance that?
Just the same way you balance anything. I mean, you just have to do it, you know. I mean, but you have to really want to do both. You really have to do one and want to do the other. You know, I mean, I'm in it because I want to write good stuff and do justice to stuff that I'm writing about. But meanwhile, I got to make a living, and I don't like the fact that, because the fact that I have to make a living means that I have to get it done. You know, otherwise you would just labor forever and not. Well, maybe I'll work on it some more tomorrow, and it's not quite right. I'll let it sit for a while. But if you have to do it, then it focuses the mind, and it just gives you some structure right there. You know, it's like any kind of structure. It just makes you. It's a help to have a deadline.
I said this at the last Writers Circle. Featured screenplay writers can take as long as they want. If you're writing for television, you don't turn it in on Tuesday, they fire you, which is a motivation.
I think that the best thing that happens in the world is to have someone call you up and say, "We want you to do this," and it's something you would do. You know, I love those writers who say, "Well, I'd have done that for free." Well, no, I wouldn't.
No.
You know, I probably wouldn't. I'd probably do something else for free. But I think the beautiful thing is to be asked to write for wages, and it be something that you love doing. And I've finally gotten old enough to where now I tend to get asked to remember. You know, I get asked to remember, and to write about remembering. I'm sorry, but that's about as good as it gets.
Except I've caught up, I think. I've written everything I remember. Now I got to.
Well, you're not dead.
No,
I mean,
no.
you can remember something else tomorrow.
Can remember, but it'd just be from breakfast. It wouldn't be.
Well, it's hopeless then.
You said you had a question, Rick.
Huh? No, I was just going to ask Roy where he got his shoes.
Ooh. These are my airport shoes.
Yeah, I
These
like
are
that.
only shoes I wore down here.
No, I got a pair. I know.
There you go. There you go. You can't, if you've got people behind you who want to get through that security line, you know, you can't be untying and tying your shoes because there are people pushing, and you got to prove that you're a real traveler and you can get your feet out of there.
And get them back in.
Yeah, get them back in, right? Hop around, and I hate traveling by air anymore.
I hate traveling with people with jewelry. First of all, I've seen people go to Miami, fly into Miami with like $8 billion worth of gold jewelry on. And I just can't resist leaning up to him saying, "Ma'am, that'll all be stole by the time you get home."
I hate traveling next to people well, men, women wouldn't be so bad, but men dressed for the gym.
Yeah.
The shorts, and all hairy people, and they're jiggling their legs like that. See, you shouldn't have to sit next to that.
Question.
There's one.
You mentioned the things that you like to write about. What is one of the worst writings?
How much time we got? The worst, I actually had there's an editor at Anniston, Alabama Star, didn't like me very much, if you can imagine. And he didn't like me at all, and he had me ride the garbage truck the day after Christmas. The heaviest garbage day of the year. He had me ride the garbage truck the day after Christmas and write about it. Now, writing about it was quite frankly a good experience, but riding the garbage truck was not, and I've done real work. I've done pick and shovel work, so this was not anything new. But the worst thing that ever happened was the New York Times had me go write a story about a guy who was in the Kennedy administration who had been charged with selling counterfeit Japanese bonds. Now, I like to write about killing and dying. I like to write about surviving. I like to write about poor people. I like to write about living. I don't know a damn thing about counterfeit Japanese bonds. And the truth is, at the time, and I'm not making this up, I didn't know what a bond was. That's the truth. I mean, I put my money in my 401k. Somebody else thought about what bonds was. And they expected me to understand. And I went to the interview, didn't understand a thing that was said, came back, wrote the story, didn't understand a thing I wrote, and it appeared in the New York Times.
Well, I guess I think in terms of people who just didn't have, I was supposed to write when Gil Hodges was the manager of the Miracle Mets, whatever year that was, when they won the World Series. I was assigned by Sports Illustrated. I was the third person assigned to try to get a long series of stories from Gil Hodges, as told to me, sort of thing. And he was a really nice fellow and everything, but I would say, the old Dodgers, I've heard all kinds of stories about when you were playing back in the day with Jackie Robinson and all those guys. I bet there's some really funny stories. That's the first, come to think of it, that's a terrible question to ask. Tell me some funny stories. But anyway, I was reduced to that, and I said, I bet some funny stuff went on there, the old Dodgers. And he said, oh, yeah, some of the things. I just wish I could remember some of them. It's like pulling teeth, and I'm not good at pulling. And when it comes out, it's like a dentist wrote it, too.
I had an assignment to go to actually pitch this. It all levels out. I mean, it really does all level out. But I was watching PBS, and I saw some mention about the Las Vegas showgirl being endangered. Well, I thought I should rush to their aid. So I went to Vegas. I went to my editor and I said, I'd like to go to Las Vegas and write about the demise of the Las Vegas showgirl. He just looked at me.
Replaced by?
Well, no, I don't know, but I almost said, never mind. Anyway, Las Vegas was getting more family oriented. Remember that? Remember when Vegas was getting more family oriented? So they asked if I could go, and he said, now let me get this straight. You want to go to Las Vegas and write about showgirls and on our nickel? And I said, yeah. Well, they let me. And I went out there, and I won $900 on the way to the fax machine. And I interviewed 7-foot-tall, breathtaking people the whole time. It was good. And so it all balances out, I guess. And I have no idea why I shared that.
Gentleman in the hat in the corner there.
I just had a question. There's some profiles that politicians have, they put their name on it, but it's ghostwritten by somebody else. And sometimes they don't even know what's in the books when they're interviewed. They're going like, say what? And so I was wondering if you had any sort of stories like that where something is written and they didn't write it, but they're taking credit for it.
Well, somebody once asked Pete Rose how many books he had ever read, and he thought about it and said, you know what, I've never read a book. And they said, Pete, you've written two. Somebody did. So I've also had sports people say that they have their wives read books for them, read books about, but yeah, I don't know. I've done did a couple of, I'm not going to tell you my Wilt Chamberlain story, but I did an As Told To story with Wilt Chamberlain, and that was interesting, but and it went well. He was a good talker. Some people talk, or great talkers, interesting talkers, but when you write it down, it doesn't really work that way. But it's funny, the difference between the oral sense and down on the page sense. So you have to think about that. I'm talking about as told to stories. I never ghost wrote anything, but you want to try to capture the way they talk without actually capturing the way they talk, I guess.
I was just thinking about that, and because my question was, both of you guys are such great interviews in person, and you're not a disappointment from what you've read on the paper, which is great. Did that develop over time, or did you start off as a great storyteller and wrote orally?
I was a really cute baby to begin with. I don't really remember it, but I'm told that I was just, people were rolling around. But I started talking because I had to go out and promote books. And that's how, so then I got on the radio and stuff. But I started out writing, and then you have to talk about it if you're going to sell them. So that's how then I got to just make speeches and something out of that. But I wasn't making speeches or doing any talking for money until I had to talk about what I'd written. So writing comes first for me.
I was so beautiful as a baby that I was almost unreal. But I actually started talking first. I was the Calhoun County public speaking champion of the 4-H club. I wrote about the conservation of our American heritage long before it was hijacked by them people. And the prize was a certificate, a $50 check, and they bought me a whaler from Burger King. Do y'all remember the whaler? Yeah, they ran out of Whoppers. They ran out of Whoppers at the victory banquet, so I had to settle for a whaler. I don't even like fish. But no, I think, I think if you maybe there, and I'm sure there are people out there, and Roy, I know you know some who write books and don't ever have to talk about them, and they write their book, and then the book comes out, and they're very romantic and reclusive.
They saw up and won't talk to anybody.
Yeah. And that looks very avant-garde. But I have found that the best way to get somebody to read your books is to shake their hand, and talk to them and be glad they're there. And we were over at the War Memorial Auditorium not, a day ago, and I'm sorry, but, you fill that thing up, people line up to tell you they like your books. That's as good as it gets. You better want to talk to them. I'm honored to talk to them, and I mean that. I mean, it's just such a good thing. So maybe, and let's face it, we're basically talking about, and I can't say this, to the camera, but it's all kind of BS. We're yucking it up, and because it's easier to yuck it up than it is to begin to weep, and to have me go over and kneel beside Roy and, pat him on his shoulder and say, let it out.
I thought you were going to say heal.
Right. No, but I did get I finally got, it's a true story. Usually when a Southerner says that, you better start rolling your pants leg up. but I have always wanted an honorary degree. And I'm very excited to tell this in a room full of people that can't get out. And I've always wanted an honorary degree, but nobody gave me an honorary degree because my people are just, they are bootleggers and they are fist fighters and they do time in jail and in the big house in Atmore. And so they're not, no one with any sense is going to give, Harvard is not going to give me an honorary degree. You know, Princeton is not waiting in the wings out here to catch me on the way to the parking deck. But what happens, but anyway, I went to Jacksonville State where I went to college for 1 year. I'm still technically a freshman. And I gave a talk. When I finished my talk, here comes the college president toting this red leather thing. And he says to me, this is long overdue. And I almost cried because I thought, I have got an honorary degree. And I opened it up, and it was my transcript. And I'm not making this up, I had an F minus. I think that was in reporting. And a B and an incomplete. I don't even know how you get an F minus. But anyway, it hurt my feelings so bad, and they saw it hurt my feelings. They gave me a degree. And when they gave me the degree, I thought, this will show that it all does come full circle to where I can heal, Roy. They gave me my degree, and I was standing up there, and I was already in a robe. So I just looked at the president and said, can y'all make me a reverend too? They made me a doctor. Can you make me a reverend too? If they had made me a reverend, I'd have healed you.
Well done.
That took 4 minutes.
Well, I at each of these meetings, Will has asked me to put the last question, but there are times when you know better than to try to out-Herod Herod. And I'd have to say, Will, this has been a terrific session, a wonderful session with two great writers, two great humorists, but two people who are, to their soul, serious about writing. And so I thank you for a great interview, these two. Thank you.